The cleaning cart squeaked down the empty hallway. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting shadows that stretched and shrank like breathing. She pushed forward. 1 floor left. Her phone buzzed. A message from the hospital, payment reminder balance due by... She turned off the screen, kept walking. The top-floor office smelled like leather and wood polish. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city below, but the curtains were drawn. In the center of the room sat a chair cognac leather, wide armrests, the kind that cost more than 3 months of her salary. Her knees buckled. Just 1 second. She lowered herself onto the edge. The leather was cool against her back. Her eyes closed. She didn't feel herself slipping sideways. Didn't hear her own breathing slow. When her eyes opened again, a figure stood in the doorway, watching. If you're still awake at this hour, carrying your own quiet weight, let me know where you're watching from. Sometimes it helps just knowing someone else is out there. The desk lamp was on. She hadn't turned it on. Her body went rigid against the leather. The room was darker than before, the city lights muted behind drawn curtains. But that single lamp cast a yellow glow across the mahogany desk. Someone had been here. Someone was still here. A shape by the window. Tall, still, back turned toward her, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't move, couldn't. The figure turned. Him. She knew his face from the portraits in the lobby, from the company newsletters stacked in the break room. The man who owned this building, the man who owned everything in it. He often came back after hours she'd heard the other cleaners mention it. Old habits from when he built this company with his own hands. The building was quietest at night. The security desk downstairs must have flagged someone on the executive floor after hours. That's why he was here. That's why he was looking at her like that. His expression gave nothing away. No anger, no surprise. Just observation, the way someone might study an insect on a windowsill before deciding whether to crush it. Her mouth opened. No words came out. He didn't speak either, just looked at her for a long moment, then walked to his desk. His shoes made no sound on the carpet. He picked up the phone. Dialed. She should stand, should apologize, should run. Her legs wouldn't obey. His voice was low, nearly inaudible. She caught fragments. Personnel files. Yes, tonight. I want all the records. Check the timesheets. The words blurred together. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out meaning. Personnel files. Records. He was calling HR. At midnight, about her. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. He set the phone down with a soft click that echoed in the silence. Then he looked at her again. Still nothing in his eyes. No accusation. No pity. Nothing she could read. Nothing she could brace against. He walked past her chair, close enough that she caught the faint scent of sandalwood. His footsteps moved toward the door. "Tomorrow," he said. Not to her, just into the air. The door closed behind him. She sat there, alone. The leather still warm where she'd been lying. What did he see? How long was he standing there watching? And the question that made her hands start to shake. What happens tomorrow? The bus ride home took 47 minutes. She counted every stop. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark window hollow eyes. Hair escaping from its ponytail, a smudge of something on her collar she hadn't noticed before. The woman in the glass looked like a stranger, someone who had already given up. The apartment building's elevator was broken again. She climbed 4 flights, her calves burning, her cleaning uniform sticking to her back with dried sweat. The hallway smelled like someone's overcooked dinner. Garlic, onions, the kind of meal that took time to prepare, the kind she hadn't made in months. She unlocked the door, Her mother sat at the kitchen table, a glass of water in front of her, untouched. The ice long melted. The television was off. The only light came from the small lamp above the stove. "You're late." The words weren't accusatory, just tired. An observation. "Extra work?" She kept her voice even. Didn't look at her mother's face. They needed someone to cover another floor. She moved to the counter where the pill organizer sat 7 compartments, each labeled with a day of the week. Tuesday. She popped it open, shook 2 white tablets into her palm. "Here, Mom, with water." Her hands trembled as she passed the glass. Water sloshed over the rim, dripping onto the table. Her mother noticed. She always noticed. "You're shaking. Just tired." She wiped the spill with her sleeve. Long day. Her mother took the pills without argument. That was new. 6 months ago, there would have been questions, pushback, worry spoken aloud. Now there was just acceptance, as if her mother had learned not to ask for things she couldn't afford to hear. She helped her mother to bed, adjusted the pillow, pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. The room smelled like eucalyptus, the cream she rubbed on her mother's joints every other night. "Sleep well, Mom." "You too." She wouldn't. Her own room was barely bigger than a closet, a single bed pushed against the wall, a dresser with a cracked mirror. The photograph on the nightstand showed her family from another time, her mother standing, smiling, healthy, her father beside her, arm around her shoulders, before the hospital bills, before the double shifts, before everything became about survival. She lay down without changing clothes. The ceiling had a water stain in the corner, shaped like a question mark. She'd noticed it the first night she moved in, 2 years ago. It hadn't gotten bigger, but she kept watching it anyway, waiting for it to spread. The phone call played in her head on repeat. Personnel files, records, timesheets. What had he seen when he looked at her, a trespasser? Someone who didn't belong in his leather chair. Breathing his expensive air, she turned onto her side. The mattress springs groaned. 70 hours this week, 12 today, 8 yesterday, 14 the day before that. Her eyes wouldn't close every time she tried. She saw his face, that blank expression, the way he'd looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. From the other room, a cough, then silence, then another cough, deeper this time. She sat up, listened. The coughing stopped. Her mother's medication cost $400 a month after insurance. The specialist visits were another $200. The hospital still sent bills from the surgery last spring, payment plans stretched across years, each envelope arriving like a small wound. If she lost this job. She stopped the thought, pressed her palms against her eyes until colors bloomed in the darkness. Don't think about it. You don't know what's going to happen, and maybe it's nothing. Maybe he just wanted to check something. Maybe the clock on the wall ticked. 1:47 a.m., 2:23 a.m., 3:15 a.m. At some point, the sky outside her window turned from black to gray. Birds started. A car alarm went off somewhere down the street. She hadn't slept. The mirror showed her the truth when she finally stood before it. Dark circles like bruises under her eyes. Skin the color of old paper. Hair she didn't have time to fix properly. She splashed cold water on her face. It didn't help. The bus was crowded at 7:30 a.m. She stood, holding the overhead rail, swaying with each turn. The man beside her smelled like coffee and aftershave. Normal things. Morning things. He was probably going to a normal job, where he would sit at a normal desk, and no one would call him to the top floor to explain why he'd fallen asleep in the owner's chair. The building looked different in daylight, taller somehow. The glass facade reflected clouds she hadn't noticed before. She walked through the revolving door. The lobby was all marble and chrome, footsteps echoing, people in suits moving past her without seeing her. That was the thing about being a cleaner. You were invisible until you made a mistake. She clocked in, walked to the supply closet, started pulling out her cart muscle memory, the same movement she'd made 1,000 times. Hey, one of the other cleaners, Maria, older, gray streaked through her dark hair, kind eyes that had seen too much. You okay? You look fine. The word came out too fast. Just didn't sleep well. Maria looked like she wanted to say something else. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes flicked to something over her shoulder, and she went quiet. The supervisor, Mr. Lawson, standing at the end of the hall. He saw her, and he turned away, walked in the other direction without a word. Her stomach dropped. He knows. They all know. She pushed her cart toward the elevator bank. The wheels squeaked against the floor. The sound had never bothered her before. Now it seemed impossibly loud. Announcing her presence, look at her. Look at the woman who fell asleep where she shouldn't have. She reached the first room on her assignment list, set her supplies on the cart, tried to breathe normally. The internal phone on the wall buzzed. She stared at it, let it ring twice, 3 times. Her hand reached out, lifted the receiver. The receptionist's voice was flat, professional, the same tone used for scheduling deliveries and confirming appointments. Floor 40 now. The line went dead. She set down the cleaning spray. Her fingers left damp prints on the plastic handle. Floor 40. Now. The supply closet suddenly felt too small. The smell of bleach and lemon cleaner pressed against her sinuses. She steadied herself against the metal shelving, felt the cold bite of it through her uniform sleeve. Move. You have to move. Her legs obeyed, barely. The hallway stretched ahead of her like a gauntlet. Cubicles on either side, low murmurs of morning conversations, the tap of keyboards, the hum of printers, normal sounds, office sounds, sounds that had nothing to do with her. She walked. A woman at the first desk looked up, then looked away, too quickly. 2 men by the water cooler stopped talking as she passed. One of them cleared his throat. Neither said anything. They know. Word traveled fast in buildings like this. The cleaners talked to the security guards. The security guards talked to the receptionists. The receptionists talked to everyone. By now, the whole building probably knew. The woman who fell asleep in the owner's chair, the woman who was about to be let go. She kept her eyes forward, counted her steps, 17, 18, 19. The elevator bank was just ahead, chrome doors reflecting distorted versions of everything around them. She could see herself in the metal, a smear of blue uniform, a blur of dark hair, a shape that didn't quite look human. Movement at the corner of her vision. Mr. Lawson, her supervisor, the man who signed her timesheets, who approved her overtime requests, who had asked her just last week to cover 3 extra floors because 2 other cleaners had called in sick. He stood at the end of the corridor, coffee cup in hand, steam rising from the rim. He saw her. Their eyes met, and he turned away, not slowly, not casually, a sharp pivot, shoulders rotating, body angling toward a different hallway. He walked in the opposite direction without looking back. The coffee sloshed in his cup. A drop spilled onto the carpet. He didn't stop to wipe it. Her feet stopped moving. He knows, and he's not going to help. The realization settled in her gut like something heavy and cold. She'd worked for him for 18 months, never said no to extra shifts, never complained about the 3rd-floor bathrooms that took twice as long, or the executive lounge that had to be spotless by 6 a.m. She'd done everything he asked, and now he couldn't even look at her. She reached the elevator, pressed the up button. Her fingerprint left a small smudge on the brushed metal. The doors opened. Empty. She stepped inside. The walls were mirrored on all sides. 4 versions of herself stared back pale, tired, small. The fluorescent light above buzzed faintly, a high-pitched whine that drilled into the space behind her eyes. She pressed 40. The doors closed. 15. The elevator rose smoothly, no sound except the soft hum of cables and machinery. Her reflection watched her from every angle. She tried not to look at it, tried not to see the dark circles, the unwashed hair pulled back too tight, the uniform that had a stain near the hem she hadn't noticed until now. 25. Her hands found each other, fingers interlacing, knuckles white. She could feel her pulse in her throat, her wrists, the soft space behind her ears. 35. What would she say? What could she possibly say? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I was just so tired. I haven't slept properly in weeks. My mother needs her medication and the insurance won't cover everything, and I've been working double shifts just to keep up, and I only closed my eyes for 1 second. Would any of that matter to a man like him? 40. The elevator chimed, a soft, pleasant sound. The doors slid open. The air was different here, cooler, cleaner. The floor was marble instead of carpet, white with gray veins running through it like frozen rivers. The walls were a soft cream color, decorated with art that probably cost more than her annual salary. Everything gleamed. Everything was silent. She stepped out. A reception desk sat directly ahead, curved wood and polished chrome, a vase of fresh flowers on the corner, white lilies. The smell hit her immediately sweet, heavy, almost like a funeral home. The woman behind the desk had silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. She didn't look up when the elevator doors opened, didn't acknowledge the sound of footsteps on marble. She just kept typing. Excuse me. Her voice came out wrong, too quiet, too thin. She cleared her throat, tried again. I was told to come up. Floor 40. The typing stopped. The woman looked up. Her eyes moved over the cleaning uniform, the scuffed shoes, the hands still twisted together at her waist. No expression crossed her face, no greeting, no smile. She lifted one hand and pointed to a row of chairs along the wall. Sit? 1 word. Then she went back to typing. The chairs were leather, dark brown with chrome legs. They looked expensive, uncomfortable, designed more for appearance than for sitting. She lowered herself onto the nearest one. The seat was cold through the thin fabric of her uniform pants. She waited. The clock on the wall ticked. Each second seemed to stretch, to pull apart at the edges. 9:07, 9:12, 9:18. The receptionist's keyboard clicked in irregular rhythms. A phone rang once, was answered in a murmur too low to understand, then went silent. What's taking so long? Her palms were sweating. She pressed them against her thighs, felt the moisture soak through the polyester. Her right foot started bouncing an old nervous habit, and she forced it to stop. Stay calm. Maybe it's not what you think. Maybe he just wants to ask questions. Maybe. A door opened, not a secretary calling her name, not an assistant with a clipboard. Him. He filled the doorway in a dark suit, white shirt, no tie, the same face she'd seen last night, the same expression that gave nothing away. His eyes found her immediately, held her for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then he spoke. 2 words. Come in. The office was smaller than she expected, not cramped. Nothing about this floor could be called cramped, but more contained. A large wooden desk dominated the center. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked like they'd never been opened. The window behind the desk showed the city sprawled below. glass and steel and tiny cars moving like insects along gray ribbons of road. He was already seated when she entered, a folder open in front of him. He didn't look up. She stood just inside the doorway, unsure whether to close the door behind her, unsure where to put her hands, unsure of everything. Sit. Wait. No. He hadn't said sit. He'd said come in. And now he was reading, and there was no chair on her side of the desk. She stayed standing. The silence stretched. He turned a page in the folder. His finger traced a line of text, stopped, moved back, traced it again. The scratch of his pen against paper filled the room, a note in the margin. Quick and precise. Her legs were starting to ache. The same legs that had carried her up 4 flights of stairs last night. That had pushed the cleaning cart for 12 hours. That had stood on buses and in elevators and in hallways while people walked past without seeing her. She shifted her weight. The movement was small, barely perceptible, but his eyes flicked up. Why were you in my office at 11 o'clock last night? The question came without preamble, no greeting, no pleasantries, just words, sharp and flat, cutting through the air between them. I was cleaning. Her voice sounded strange in this room, too thin, too ordinary. The executive floor is on my rotation. I finish there every night 3 nights a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, sometimes more if someone calls in sick or if there's a special event and they need extra. Who assigns your rotation? Mr. Lawson. He's the supervisor for the night cleaning crew. He handles all the scheduling and the overtime requests. And I know who he is. He wrote something down. The pen moved quickly. Who asked you to stay until 11? Her mouth opened, closed. Who asked you? The overtime request had come through email, a form she'd filled out herself, signed by Mr. Lawson, filed with HER. Except she hadn't filled it out, he had. He'd handed her the tablet already completed, asked her to confirm with her thumbprint. Don't worry about the details. I've got you covered. She could still hear his voice. Casual, friendly, even. The voice of someone doing her a favor. She swallowed. I requested the extra hours. You requested them, yes? Specifically requested to work until 11 p.m. on a Monday night. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And the way he said it made her realize how absurd it sounded. I needed the overtime. The words came faster now, tumbling over each other. My mother has medical bills, and the insurance doesn't cover everything. And I thought if I could just work a few extra shifts each week, I could keep up with the payments and still have enough for groceries. And how many hours did you work this week? The interruption was clean, surgical. No room for her explanations, her justifications, her story. She blinked. This week, how many hours? Her mind scrambled for the number, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the double shift on Tuesday, when the regular crew was short-staffed, the extra floor on Wednesday, when Mr. Lawson asked her to cover for someone who called in sick, the early morning on Thursday, before her regular shift even started, because there was a board meeting and the conference room needed to be immaculate. I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to check my estimate. She counted in her head, added, subtracted, added again. Maybe 70. The pen stopped moving. He looked at her, not at the folder, not at the window, at her. The silence lasted 3 seconds. 4, 5. 70 hours. Approximately. I'd have to look at the actual timesheet to give you the exact. In 1 week. Yes. He wrote something down. The pen moved slowly this time, deliberately. She couldn't see what he was writing from where she stood. The angle was wrong. When he looked up again, his expression hadn't changed. Still unreadable. Still that flat assessment that gave nothing away. How many of those hours were overtime? All of them over 40, I suppose, so maybe 30 hours of overtime. Give or take, depending on how you count the... And how many of those overtime hours were you paid for? The question hit her like cold water. Paid for. She thought about her last paycheck. The numbers that didn't quite add up, that never quite added up, but she'd assumed it was taxes or deductions or something she didn't fully understand. She'd never questioned it, never had time to question it. The money went straight to bills the moment it hit her account, and by the end of each month there was nothing left, and she'd start the cycle again. I don't know. You don't know how much you were paid. I know how much I was paid. I just don't know if it matched the hours exactly. I'd have to look at the breakdown. The pay stubs are at home in a folder, and I haven't had time to go through them properly because who else works the schedule you work? There are 4 of us on the night crew: Maria Santos, James Weber, Patricia Coleman, and me. We rotate floors depending on what's needed and who's available, and do they work 70-hour weeks? She hesitated. I don't know their schedules exactly. We don't really talk about hours. Everyone's just trying to get through the shift and go home. But you know yours, yes? And you know that 70 hours in a week is... He paused, as if searching for the right word. Unusual. Her hands were trembling. She clasped them together in front of her, felt the dampness of her palms pressing against each other. I volunteered for the extra shifts. No one forced me to take them. I needed the money and the overtime was available, and you volunteered. Yes, to work until you collapsed in my chair. The words hung in the air. She had no response to them, no defense. He was right. That was exactly what had happened. He closed the folder. The sound was soft, almost gentle, but it felt final, like a door shutting, like a verdict being delivered. He stood. The movement was slow, controlled. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city below. The morning light caught the gray at his temples. Do you know what I do when I find something that doesn't make sense? She shook her head, then realized he couldn't see her. No. I ask questions. I look at the numbers. I follow the trail until I understand what I'm seeing. He turned back to face her. Do you know what the numbers in your file don't show? No. Overtime pay, for the last 3 months, your timesheet shows standard 40-hour weeks. No overtime. No extra shifts. His eyes held hers. But your badge swipes tell a different story. Your badge says you've been in this building 70, sometimes 80 hours a week, for months. Her mouth went dry. That's not possible. I signed the forms. Mr. Lawson approved them. They said the overtime was someone. He continued, has been adjusting your records, logging you out when you were still working, approving overtime that was never paid. She couldn't speak. The room seemed to tilt. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, the large conference room on this floor. He walked past her, toward the door. Be there. I don't understand. Her voice cracked. Am I being fired? He stopped. His hand rested on the door handle. Tomorrow, he said again. You'll understand tomorrow. The conference room door was heavier than she expected. She pushed it open and stepped inside, and 12 faces turned toward her at once. The table was long, polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the overhead lights in white streaks. Men in suits sat on either side, gray hair, reading glasses, gold watches catching the light. 2 women among them. Equally formal, equally still. Papers spread before each person. Coffee cups half empty. The smell of expensive cologne mixed with something sharper underneath. Something that smelled like anticipation. No one smiled. No one spoke. There was one empty chair at the far end of the table, positioned apart from the others. The distance was deliberate, obvious, A chair for someone who didn't belong but was required to be present anyway. She walked toward it. Her shoes squeaked against the polished floor rubber soles on wood, and the sound seemed impossibly loud. Every step announced her. Every step reminded everyone in the room exactly who she was. A cleaner, in a room full of executives. She sat. The leather was cold through her uniform pants. The armrests were too high. She didn't know what to do with her hands, so she folded them in her lap and looked down at them. The door opened again. He walked in without looking at anyone, moved directly to the head of the table where a larger chair waited. Black leather, higher back than the others. The seat of power. He lowered himself into it, pulled a folder from somewhere beneath the table, and began reading. Silence. The clock on the wall ticked. The air conditioning hummed. Someone at the middle of the table cleared their throat, then went quiet again. "Let's begin." The voice came from her left. "Mr. Lawson." He stood, adjusting his tie, a single sheet of paper in his hand. He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the man at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. As you know, there was an incident 2 nights ago involving a member of the cleaning staff." He paused, let the words settle. "We're here to review the facts and determine appropriate action." The facts. She gripped her hands tighter in her lap. Her knuckles whitened. "At approximately 11 p.m., the cleaning staff member in question was found in the executive office on this floor." Mr. Lawson's voice was smooth, rehearsed. "She had accessed the office without authorization and was discovered asleep in the chairman's personal chair." Without authorization, her mouth opened. She wanted to speak, to correct him, to say that she cleaned that office 3 times a week, that it was on her assigned rotation, that he was the one who had approved her schedule. But no one looked at her. No one gave her space to speak. "The employee's behavior represents a serious breach of company protocol," Mr. Lawson continued. "Unauthorized access to executive areas, misuse of company property, failure to complete assigned duties within standard working hours." The woman to her right, Ms. Hayes, she recognized her from HR, had seen her name on forms she'd signed, was nodding. Small, rhythmic movements, agreement before the argument was even finished. "Furthermore," Mr. Lawson said, and something in his voice shifted, became harder, more deliberate. "Our review of the circumstances indicates that the employee chose to remain on the premises well past her scheduled shift, of her own volition, without authorization or approval from her supervisor." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Of her own volition. She could feel the blood draining from her face. Her fingers had gone numb where they gripped each other. He's lying. He's standing right there, in front of all these people, and he's lying. "To be clear," Mr. Lawson said, "the employee was not asked to work overtime. She was not scheduled for additional hours. The decision to remain in the building until 11 p.m. was entirely her own." She looked at him then, really looked. He was staring straight ahead, not at the chairman, not at anyone in particular. His jaw was set. A muscle twitched near his temple. A thin line of sweat had appeared along his hairline. "He knows I know he's lying, and he doesn't care." "Based on these findings," Mr. Lawson concluded, "I recommend immediate termination of employment. The breach of protocol is clear. The liability exposure is significant, and the company cannot afford to set a precedent that I didn't." The words came out before she could stop them. Quiet, almost inaudible, but in the silence of the room, they carried, "I didn't stay on my own. You asked me to. You gave me the extra shifts. You told me the overtime was approved and filed, and the records don't support that claim." Mr. Lawson's response was immediate. Cutting. "The timesheet system shows standard 40-hour weeks. No overtime requests filed, no additional shifts assigned through proper channels, because you..." Are you suggesting, Miss Hayes interrupted, her voice clipped and precise, that your supervisor falsified company documentation? That's a very serious accusation to make in a room like this. Every eye in the room was on her now. Not sympathetic, not curious, assessing, judging, waiting for her to make another mistake they could use. I'm not suggesting anything. Her voice was shaking. She couldn't stop it. I'm telling you what happened. I was asked to work extra hours. I was told it was approved. I did exactly what I was asked to do. Without written documentation, I signed forms on a tablet. He showed me where to put my thumbprint, and there are no such forms in the system. Miss Hayes shuffled papers in front of her, a performance of thoroughness. We've checked thoroughly, multiple times. Because he deleted them, because he never filed them, because this was the plan all along. I think we've heard enough, someone said. An older man near the head of the table, gray beard, wire-rimmed glasses, the look of someone who made decisions and expected them to stick. The evidence is clear. The employee violated company policy, has no documentation to support her version of events, and is now attempting to shift blame to her supervisor rather than accept responsibility. Nods around the table. Agreement spreading like a wave. I move that we proceed with termination, Mr. Lawson said. His voice had steadied. Confident again. Effective immediately. With a note in her personnel file regarding the circumstances. Seconded, said Miss Hayes. The chairman hadn't spoken. He sat at the head of the table, the folder still closed in front of him, his hands resting flat on either side of it. His face gave nothing away. He's going to let them do this. He's going to sit there and watch them destroy me, and he's not going to say a single word. All in favor. Hands went up around the table. 1, 2, 5, 8, 11. Only one person hadn't voted. The man at the head of the table, he stood. The movement was slow, deliberate. Every eye in the room shifted toward him. The hands that had been raised lowered uncertainly, hovering in the air like they weren't sure whether they still counted. Before we finalize anything, he said, and his voice was quiet, but it filled the room in a way Mr. Lawson's never had. There are a few things I'd like to share with everyone. He reached beneath the table, pulled out a second folder. This one was thick. The papers inside were marked with colored tabs red, blue, yellow, organized in a way that suggested hours of work. I spent the last 2 nights making some phone calls, Gio, pulling some records, cross-referencing some numbers. He opened the folder. I think you'll all find this very interesting. The room went still. Mr. Lawson's hand, still raised from calling the vote, slowly lowered to his side. His eyes moved from the chairman to the folder, then back again. A line of sweat had appeared at his hairline, glistening under the fluorescent lights. I don't understand. His voice had lost its polish. We've already reviewed the relevant documentation. The employee's timesheet clearly shows standard hours and the timesheet? The chairman opened the folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper. Let's talk about the timesheet. Mr. Lawson. He slid the paper across the table. It traveled the length of the polished surface, passing hands that didn't reach for it until it came to rest directly in front of Mr. Lawson. That's a printout from the digital timesheet system, the version filed with HR. Notice the dates Monday through Friday of last week. Notice the hours 8 per day. 40 total. The chairman's voice was even, unhurried, almost pleasant. Very clean, very organized. Exactly what you'd expect from a well-managed department. Mr. Lawson picked up the paper. His eyes scanned it quickly. Yes, this confirms what I said. Standard hours, no overtime, no irregularities. Now, look at this. A second paper slid across the table. Same trajectory. Same destination. That's the badge swipe log from building security. Every time an employee enters or exits the building, it's recorded. Time-stamped down to the second. Stored on servers that require my personal authorization to access. The chairman paused. Do you see the discrepancy? Mr. Lawson. She couldn't see the papers from where she sat, but she could see Mr. Lawson's face. The color was draining from it, starting at his cheeks and moving downward, leaving his skin the color of old candle wax. The badge log shows entry at 6:03 a.m. on Monday, exit at 11:47 p.m. The chairman recited the numbers from memory, not looking at any paper. Tuesday entry at 5:31 a.m., exit at 12:14 a.m. the following morning. Wednesday entry at 6 a.m., exit at 11:52 p.m., Thursday. There must be some error in the system. Mr. Lawson's voice cracked on the last word. Badge readers malfunction all the time. Everyone knows that. I can have ITICT look into the calibration and I already had IT look into it 2 nights ago. In fact, that was one of the calls I made from my office. The chairman pulled out another sheet. They confirmed the badge system has been functioning normally for the past 26 months. No errors, no glitches, no malfunctions of any kind. Ms. Hayes shifted in her chair. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but it angled her body away from Mr. Lawson, creating distance, the way someone might edge away from a sinking ship. So we have a discrepancy, the chairman continued. The official timesheet says 40 hours. The badge log says 73. That's 33 hours of unrecorded, unpaid work in a single week. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. Can anyone here explain that? No one spoke. No one moved. She watched Mr. Lawson's hands. They were flat on the table now, pressing down hard, as if he needed something solid to hold on to. The knuckles had gone white. A tremor ran through his fingers, small, barely visible, but there. I have more. The chairman pulled out a thick stack of papers held together with a large binder clip. He didn't slide these across the table. Instead, he held them up so everyone could see the tabs, the highlights, the handwritten notes in the margins. Payroll records, going back 6 months. He flipped through the pages slowly, deliberately. This employee was paid for exactly 40 hours per week, every single week, no overtime, no shift differentials, no holiday pay for the Labor Day weekend she worked, or the 4th of July, or any of the 11 other holidays the badge log shows her in this building, when the rest of us were home with our families. He knows. He knows everything. Her hands were shaking in her lap. She pressed them harder against her thighs. I cross-referenced the payroll data with the badge logs for the entire night cleaning staff. The chairman set the papers down with a soft thud. Do you want to know what I found? Mr. Lawson? Mr. Lawson didn't answer. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping beneath the skin. Sweat had begun to drip from his temples, running down the sides of his face, staining the collar of his white shirt with dark patches. 7 employees, all assigned to night shifts, all showing significant discrepancies between logged hours and paid hours. The chairman's voice hardened. Over the past 12 months, those 7 employees worked a combined total of approximately 4,200 unpaid hours. At their contracted overtime rate, that comes to roughly $96,000 in stolen wages. The number hung in the air like smoke. $96,000. She saw it register around the table, the sharp intakes of breath, the widened eyes, the way bodies shifted away from Mr. Lawson as if he'd suddenly become contagious, as if failure might spread through proximity. I want to be very clear about what I'm saying. The chairman stood, walked slowly around the table, His footsteps were the only sound in the room. Someone in this company has been systematically falsifying time records for at least a year. Someone has been stealing from employees who trusted us to pay them fairly for their work. Someone has been exploiting people who were too afraid, too desperate, or too exhausted to question why their paychecks never quite matched their hours. He stopped directly behind Mr. Lawson's chair. "Mr. Lawson, you are the supervisor of the night cleaning staff. You approve their timesheets. You sign off on their schedules. You authorize their overtime or choose not to." His voice dropped. Who else in this company would have the access and the motivation to make these particular changes? Mr. Lawson's mouth opened and closed. A string of saliva stretched between his lips. His face had gone from pale to gray, the color of old dishwater. There has to be some explanation. Someone else must have. There is an explanation. The chairman reached into the folder one more time. Emails, sent from your company account, to the payroll processing department, instructing them to adjust hours for what you called administrative corrections. Dated, time-stamped, and signed with your personal digital signature. He dropped the papers on the table in front of Mr. Lawson. They scattered, fanning out across the polished surface like an accusation made visible. She could see lines of text from where she sat, highlighted in bright yellow. Names, numbers, dates, instructions written in formal language that couldn't hide what they really meant. Mr. Lawson stared at them. His face had gone beyond gray now, taking on a greenish tint. Sweat was running openly down his temples, dripping onto his collar, onto the papers, leaving small wet marks on the evidence of his own theft. His hands trembled violently. He looked like a man watching his own execution. "I can explain." His voice was barely a whisper, wet, broken. "There were budget constraints, pressure from above. I was told to reduce labor costs by 15% and I didn't know how else to meet the targets, and I thought, you were told to cut costs." The chairman's voice was ice. "So you decided to steal from the people who clean your toilets." The words hit like a slap. Mr. Lawson flinched, actually flinched, his shoulders curving inward, his head dropping toward his chest. He looked smaller suddenly, diminished, a man collapsing into himself under the weight of what he'd done. Around the table, no one would meet his eyes. Miss Hayes had turned her chair fully away from him, her back rigid, her hands gripping her own folder like a shield. The older man with the gray beard was studying his coffee cup with sudden intensity. The others stared at the table, the walls, the window anywhere but at the man who had stood there minutes ago. So confident, so certain, ready to destroy a woman's life to protect himself. "I've already contacted the company's legal counsel," the chairman said, returning to his seat, "and the State Labor Board, and the Attorney General's office. They will be conducting independent investigations into the wage theft documented here, as well as any other irregularities they might uncover." He sat down. "Mr. Lawson, Ms. Hayes, you have 24 hours to submit your resignations. If you choose not to resign voluntarily, you will be terminated for cause, and the company will cooperate fully with any criminal charges filed against you." Miss Hayes made a small, choked noise, like something caught in her throat. Her face had gone white. I only processed the paperwork he sent me. I didn't know what the adjustments were for. I just did what I was told, and you didn't ask." The chairman's voice held no sympathy. "You saw numbers that didn't make sense, and you processed them anyway because it was easier than asking questions. That's almost worse." Silence. Mr. Lawson pushed back from the table. The chair legs scraped against the floor, a harsh, ugly sound that made everyone wince. He stood, swaying slightly like a man who'd forgotten how to use his legs. His hand reached for the table to steady himself. Missed. Reached again. He walked toward the door with unsteady steps, his shoulder hitting the door frame as he passed through it. He didn't look back, didn't apologize, didn't say a word. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow echoed. Miss Hayes gathered her papers with trembling hands, dropping half of them, picking them up, dropping them again. Her face was blotchy now, red patches spreading across her cheeks and neck. She hurried toward the door, heels clicking too fast, almost running. The conference room felt larger now, emptier. The remaining executives sat frozen, uncertain what to do, waiting for someone to tell them the meeting was over. The chairman turned to look at her. His expression had changed. The hardness was still there, but underneath it was something else, something that almost looked like recognition. "The call I made that night," he said quietly, his words meant only for her, "wasn't to fire you. It wasn't to report you. It wasn't about punishing you for falling asleep in my chair." She stared at him. Her throat was too tight to speak. "It was to start an audit." He paused. "Because when I saw you in that chair, I didn't see someone breaking the rules. I saw someone who had been worked until her body gave out." The remaining executives sat frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence pressed against her ears like cotton. "I need to ask you something." The chairman leaned forward slightly. "And I need you to answer honestly." She nodded. It was all she could manage. "That night, when you sat down in my chair..." His voice was different now, softer, almost gentle. "How long had it been since you actually slept? Not rested, not closed your eyes for a few hours, actually slept?" The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to answer, then stopped, tried to remember. When was the last time she'd slept through the night? The last time she'd woken up feeling anything other than exhausted? "I don't know," she said. Her voice came out hoarse, cracked. "Weeks? Maybe. I can't remember." He nodded slowly. He didn't look surprised. "I thought so." He reached into the folder again. This time, he pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Do you know what this is?" She shook her head. "Your insurance enrollment form from 18 months ago, when you started working here?" He held it up. "You listed a dependent, your mother. You noted that she requires ongoing medical care for a chronic condition." Her throat tightened. She hadn't thought about that form in over a year. Just paperwork, just another thing to sign during orientation. "I looked into it," he continued. "The condition requires regular treatment, expensive treatment, the kind that insurance covers partially but not completely." He set the paper down. "The kind that leaves you with bills you can't pay on a 40-hour salary." She didn't respond. Couldn't. "So, you worked extra shifts. You took every hour you could get. You pushed yourself past the point of exhaustion because you had someone depending on you. And you couldn't afford to stop. You couldn't afford to say no. You couldn't afford to ask questions about why your paycheck never seemed to match your hours." The words landed somewhere deep in her chest. Hearing them spoken aloud by someone else, by someone who understood what they meant, made something crack inside her. A wall she hadn't known she'd built. And no one noticed. His voice softened even further. "No one asked why you were always the first one here and the last one to leave. No one questioned why you never turned down a shift. No one cared enough to see that you were running on empty." She blinked hard, her vision blurred. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs, feeling the rough fabric of her uniform, grounding herself in something physical. "The night I found you in my office..." He paused, looked down at his hands for a moment. "I wasn't angry. I was confused, curious. What would make someone fall asleep in a place like that? What would push a person so far past their limits that their body just stopped? He stood and walked toward the window, the city spread out below, glass and steel in movement, indifferent to everything happening in this room. I've been tracking irregularities in the payroll system for 3 months, numbers that didn't add up, budget allocations that should have been higher, overtime expenses that were mysteriously low. He turned back to face her. I knew someone was manipulating the records. I just didn't know how deep it went, or who was being hurt by it. 3 months. He'd been investigating for 3 months, before he'd ever seen her face. That night, when I walked into my office and saw you, he stopped. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the controlled exterior. You were the first person I actually saw, not numbers on a spreadsheet, not discrepancies in a report, a real person, exhausted, broken down, collapsed in my chair because her body had finally refused to carry her any further. Her hands were shaking again. She couldn't stop them. The call I made wasn't to HR, it wasn't to security, it wasn't to have you removed from the building. He walked back toward the table slowly. It was to my legal team, to the auditing firm we keep on retainer, to a labor attorney I've worked with before on other matters. He stopped directly in front of her chair. I told them to start immediately. No delays, no excuses. I wanted answers by morning. She looked up at him. His face was close now, close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes, the gray at his temples, the slight tension in his jaw, not from anger, but from something else, something that looked almost like regret. Do you know why I didn't wake you that night? She shook her head. Because I looked at you, and I saw what exhaustion looks like when it's been carried too long. I saw someone who had been running on nothing for so long that she didn't know how to stop, and I thought... He paused. His voice dropped. I thought, let her rest, just for a few more minutes, because it looked like no one had let her rest in a very long time. A sound escaped her throat. Not a word, not quite a sob, something in between. You didn't collapse because you're weak. His voice was quiet now, meant only for her, even though every person in the room could hear. You collapsed because you've been carrying too much for too long, and no one noticed, no one helped, no one thought to ask if you were okay. She pressed her hands against her face. Her palms came away wet. I'm asking now. The room was silent. The remaining executives had stopped shuffling papers, stopped pretending to look elsewhere. They were watching. But for the first time, it didn't feel like judgment. It felt like witnessing. She lowered her hands, looked at him. I'm tired. The words came out raw, unfiltered. I'm so tired, and I don't know how to stop being tired. I don't know how to rest. Every time I close my eyes, I think about the bills, and my mother, and everything I should be doing instead of sleeping. And I know. He pulled a chair from the table, positioned it in front of her, and sat down, eye to eye. Equal. I know. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, held it out to her. This is a new contract, drafted this morning by my personal attorney. He waited for her to take it. Standard 40-hour week. No exceptions. No overtime requests will be approved for you without my personal signature. Your hourly rate has been increased to reflect the overtime pay you should have received over the past year and didn't. She stared at the paper. The words swam in front of her eyes. There's also a one-time payment included. Back wages for every hour you worked and weren't compensated for. He paused. It won't fix everything, but it's a start. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper, numbers, paragraphs. Legal language she didn't fully understand, but one number stood out, a figure at the bottom of the first page. Circled in blue ink. $47,832, back wages owed. She read it again, and again. The number didn't change. I don't... Her voice broke. I don't understand. Why? Why are you doing this for me? He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, more personal, less like a chairman and more like a man carrying his own weight. My father built this company, started with nothing, worked himself to exhaustion for 30 years. He looked down at his hands. He passed at his desk, heart attack, 53 years old. They found him in the morning, still holding his pen, still working. She didn't move, didn't breathe. I inherited everything he built. The company, the buildings, the money, the reputation. He looked up. But I also inherited his lesson. The one he taught me without ever meaning to that work will take everything you have, if you let it. And the people who benefit from your sacrifice will never notice what it cost you. They'll just keep taking until there's nothing left. He stood, straightened his jacket. I notice now, he gestured toward the remaining executives. They've all witnessed what happened here today. The company will cooperate fully with every investigation. The other affected employees will receive similar compensation, and there will be changes, real changes, to make sure this doesn't happen again. She nodded slowly. Her fingers moved to the pen that sat on the table in front of her. Picked it up. The weight of it felt significant somehow, heavy with everything it meant. There's one more thing, he said. She paused, pen hovering over the signature line. This floor, the executive floor, it needs to be cleaned properly, by someone who understands what it means to take care of a place. He walked toward the door. I'd like to request that you be assigned here from now on. If that's acceptable to you. She stared at him. He stopped at the threshold, turned back. Not because you owe me anything. His voice was quiet. But because I'd like to know that someone is watching over this floor who understands what it really costs to keep places like this running. He left. The door closed softly behind him. She sat alone in the conference room, the contract in one hand, the pen in the other. The city hummed outside the windows. The air conditioning whispered. The clock ticked. She signed her name, and for the first time in months, maybe years, her hands didn't shake. But as she set the pen down, one thought surfaced. Small, quiet, but impossible to push away. How do I go home tonight and tell my mother that everything just changed? The revolving door pushed her out into the afternoon. Sunlight hit her face. Warm, direct. She stopped on the sidewalk and tilted her head back, letting it sink into her skin. The city moved around her cars, honking. Pedestrians brushing past. The usual noise of a Wednesday afternoon, but for a moment, she just stood there, breathing, feeling the heat on her cheeks. When had she last noticed the sun? When had she last stood still long enough to feel anything at all? The bus ride home felt different. She sat by the window instead of standing, watched the buildings pass, counted the stops without the usual knot in her stomach, without the constant calculation of hours and money and how much sleep she could steal before the next alarm. Her apartment building looked the same. The elevator was still broken. The stairs still creaked under her feet. The hallway still smelled like someone's cooking onions and something spicy, drifting from behind a closed door. But when she opened her own door, something had shifted. Her mother sat at the kitchen table. The same table, the same chair, the same glass of water with the ice half melted. But when she looked up, her eyes narrowed slightly, studying, noticing. You look different. She set her bag down on the counter, walked to the pill organizer, Tuesday, shook the tablets into her palm. Different how? Her mother watched her pour the water, watched her hands as they moved. Lighter, she said, like you put something down. She brought the pills and the glass to the table, sat down across from her mother instead of hurrying to the next task. Something happened at work. It wasn't a question. Her mother had always known, had always seen through the careful smiles, the deflections, the reassurances that never quite rang true. Something happened, she agreed. Something good, she told her. Not everything. Not the conference room. Not the accusations. Not the moment when she'd believed her whole life was about to collapse. Just the parts that mattered. The back pay. The new contract. The promise that things would be different now. Her mother listened without interrupting. When the story was finished, she reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. The grip was weaker than it used to be, but still firm, still certain. You've been carrying this alone. I didn't want you to worry. I worried anyway. Her mother squeezed her fingers. That's what mothers do, even when their daughters try to hide things. They sat like that for a while. The apartment was quiet. The light through the window had turned golden, late afternoon softening into early evening. The pill bottles on the counter caught the light, amber and orange. For once, she didn't feel the urge to get up and do something. For once, sitting still felt like enough. 1 week later, she walked into the building at her usual time. The lobby was the same marble floors, chrome fixtures, footsteps echoing off high ceilings. But something had changed. The security guard at the front desk nodded as she passed. "Morning," he said. Just one word, but he looked at her when he said it. She nodded back. The supply closet was where it had always been. She pulled out her cart, checked her supplies, started toward the elevator. The wheels still squeaked against the floor. The lemon cleaner still stung her nose when she opened the bottle, but her feet didn't drag. Her shoulders didn't ache before the shift even started. Maria caught her in the hallway near the service elevator. The older woman pulled her into a quick hug, arms tight. The smell of lavender soap, then stepped back, eyes bright. "Heard what happened," Maria said. "About time somebody saw." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and kept walking. Mr. Lawson's office was empty when she passed it on the 3rd floor. The nameplate had been removed from the door. The desk inside was bare. No papers, no computer, no coffee cup with the company logo. Just empty space where authority used to sit. She didn't slow down, didn't linger, just noted it and moved on. The elevator carried her to the 40th floor. She stepped out into the quiet hallway, pushed her cart past the reception desk, past the conference room with its long polished table, past the closed doors of offices she would clean later in the evening. And then she reached his office. The door was open. The room was empty. Through the glass, she could see the city spread out below, afternoon light catching the windows of distant buildings. And the chair, cognac leather, wide armrests, the same chair she'd collapsed into that night, so exhausted she couldn't keep her eyes open. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at it. It was just a chair, leather and wood and stuffing, an object, a thing. But it was also the place where someone had finally seen her, where someone had looked past the uniform and the schedule and the invisible labor and noticed that she was a person who was tired, a person who needed help, a person who mattered. She took a breath, let it out slowly. The chair didn't scare her anymore. She turned and walked away. The hallway stretched ahead of her, ordinary and familiar. The cleaning cart waited. The work waited. The hours would pass, and she would go home. And she would sleep, really sleep, and tomorrow she would come back and do it again. But something was different now. She knew she had been seen. And sometimes, that was enough. There's a quiet that comes after a story like this. Not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that settles somewhere in the chest and stays for a while, heavy and tender at the same time. Many of us know what it feels like to carry something alone, to show up day after day, doing work that nobody sees, to keep going when everything in us wants to stop, because someone is counting on us. Perhaps you've been there too, pushing through exhaustion because stopping felt impossible, because love demanded it, because that's just what you do. Some weight doesn't need explaining. Some tiredness doesn't need a name. It's okay to sit with whatever this story stirred up. It doesn't need to be resolved or understood completely. The feeling is allowed to just be there, and then, when it's ready, to pass. We don't always get the recognition we deserve, but sometimes not always. But sometimes someone notices, and that small thing, being seen, can be enough to help us breathe again. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know.